right, welcome back, Consumer Law 101 viewers and students. We are so excited to start our advanced video series with you now that we've gone through a lot of the basics of credit reporting, credit repair, common definitions, terms, even some scams, lies, and myths to avoid. Now, here in the advanced section, we go over some more of the laws in some greater depth and start talking about how to really fight back in this arena. So, again, my name is Attorney Aaron Swift. I'm the CEO and Managing Partner of Swift Law North. And today, again, is the first video in our advanced series, and it is entitled ABCs of the FDCPA Part 1 Who, What, and Why. Okay, like always, we start with our agenda. And then we end always with consumer best practices. One of the things I forgot to mention in our video series for the basic videos is that the PowerPoints come with the video series. So you'll be able to get these and know, hopefully you're taking notes, but just so that you know, these tools will be available for you with the videos. So you can follow along, of course, as I go through, but don't feel like it's your one opportunity to see this information. So, all right. We talked about the title being the who, what, and why. So that's the three sections. And then again, we're going to end with our consumer best practices. Okay, so let's start with the who. This is very important. The FDCPA, which is the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, it only applies to third-party debt collectors. That is someone who's collecting on behalf of someone else. For example, that can be Hunter Warfield collecting on behalf of an apartment debt. It also includes junk debt buyers or debt buyers because they obtain or purchase the debt or allegedly purchase and obtain the debt after it's been in default. So in that instance, even though they may be considered a creditor because they own the debt, they're nonetheless considered a third-party debt collector or a third-party collector under the FDCPA because they obtained the debt after default. One important distinction in terms of the who is also protects only consumers. Those are individuals, so not businesses, corporations, or other entities. It's only individuals who are protected by this law and who then can also sue by using this law. Okay, so what's the what? So we talked about the who, applies to debt collectors, protects individuals. What is the law about? It applies to consumer debt. That's debt that's incurred primarily for household, family, or personal use. Think personal credit cards, student loans, even a business credit card with personal purchases, a homeowners, association debt. There was an important case in Florida that I was involved with, to make sure that HOA and condo debts are considered consumer debts as long as it's not for an investment purpose. Um, there's not necessarily an extension in credit that needs to be involved, like a true credit transaction, like a credit card, because, for example, a medical debt wouldn't be involved in that necessarily. But it's important to understand there's no business debt. If you have a house that's just purely income based and that you generate rent, that wouldn't be considered a consumer debt if you have a note or mortgage on that house. The what it also is a federal law, so it applies to all 50 states and U.S. territories. That's kind of important because our program from consumer law as it transitions to litigation via Swift Law North, we are then able to practice with and co-counsel with and refer cases to lawyers all across the country via our network. Again, that's very important. And it also applies even if the debt has been reduced to a judgment, which is important because unfortunately we know that a lot of consumers end up with judgments with old credit card debts, old deficiencies, and so on and so forth. We have a lot of videos about specific debt defense in our Pro series. I encourage you to check that out. But even if a consumer debt has been reduced to a judgment, that the protections still apply. All right, we talked about the who and the what. Now, what's the why? This law was passed, a long time ago now, almost 50 years, and Congress, even at that time, realized that we really wanted to eliminate abusive, deceptive, and unfair debt collection practices. The courts note that abusive debt collection leads to higher rates of bankruptcy and even divorce. Importantly, too, we're going to talk about later in our video series, there are some recent Reg F changes that really bring the FDCPA kind of kicking and screaming into the 20th century. And the other interesting thing, the why, and it's not really talked about much, but the law is also meant to protect law abiding debt collectors because those that break the law and go past the line, and if they're successful and more profitable because they are able to use threats and scare tactics and deceit, that would give them a competitive advantage over the law abiding debt collectors. And then the law and business, what that can create is what's called a race to the bottom. Everyone's trying to do worse and worse to one up the other bad guy. And if there aren't these protections in place, yes, it of course protects consumers, but it also is meant to protect the competitive advantages between debt collectors that do not break the law. Okay, so we always end our videos with consumer best practices. What we want you to start understanding from our advanced video series, the basics of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. It's the most important federal law related to debt collection. Just beware. There's a lot of misinformation online about the protections of the FDCPA, what it does and doesn't do. I would only recommend taking advice from licensed attorneys, like us at Swift Law North. Um, the other thing that's really important to think about is this law is called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Congress could have just called it the DCPA, the Debt Collection Practices Act, but even baked into the very name, the very first word is about fairness. So if you feel like you have been treated unfairly, someone you know has been harassed or abused by a debt collector, reach out. These laws have protections. You may be entitled to damages, could be thousands of dollars, maybe even debt forgiveness and trade line forgiveness or trade line deletion. So um, it's a really good protection. I also want to mention too, we'll talk about this throughout. The FDCPA provides that the bad guys, defendants, would pay attorneys' fees and costs. So that's a great thing. Again, just wanted to welcome you all back into our advanced series. We can't wait to get, on to our next, topics about the FDCPA and the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. For more information, visit us at consumerlaw101.com and swiftlawnorth.com. Thank you.